Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Shear, and welcome to Business Minds Coffee Chat. The goal of this show is to share insights, help to lift and inspire others, and deliver relevant, meaningful, and actionable content. There are many defining moments in our lives that can fundamentally change who we are. These moments can force us to challenge our thinking, our beliefs, our behaviors, our actions. I believe we're experiencing one of these moments right now. When you don't know what to do next, do the next kind thing. So, where is the goodness in all this? We have an opportunity to learn, to grow, to be more inclusive and tolerant, to be better human beings and better leaders, to create a better future for all. When it comes to goodness and leadership, there's no better expert than our next guest. He's a husband and father, an inspirational leadership coach and visionary, a professional speaker, a best-selling author, creator of the Good Leadership Movement, founder of the Good Leadership Breakfast Series, and the author of one of the top leadership blogs in America, Good Leadership Today. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Good Leadership Enterprises, Paul Batz.
Thank you. Very happy to be with you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm grateful for you being here today. So let's dive right in. Please share with us first, where does your story begin, Paul, and at what point did you discover your why?
Well, it's a pretty dramatic story. I love to share it. I had been a professional services partner in public relations and advertising and made my way to a leadership consulting firm that was primarily a pre-hire executive assessment firm. And I had a wonderful ride for about 7 years in that firm, but the economy got really, really difficult about 10 or 11 years ago now. And what I discovered is that there are horses for courses, and I was the right horse to get that firm to grow. But as soon as the course changed, it wasn't me, and I knew it, and the stress was really, really difficult. And meanwhile, during that same time period, it was March 15, 2009, my 103-year-old grandmother made a phone call to me. It was one morning. She and I were very close. She knew my life was difficult, but she called and said, Paul, I've lived a really good life, and I'm tired. And I'm calling all my grandchildren one at a time. You're the first one. And she said, I've got a message for each one of you. And the message for you is this. You are a good man, and the world needs good men like you to spread goodness. That's it. I love you. Goodbye.
Wow.
2 days later, on St. Patrick's Day, she died. And I walked around with that in my head thinking, oh my gosh, what does this mean? The world is pretty difficult. It was not at all dissimilar to what we're going through now, different reason. Most business people were battered and bruised. Their confidence was really low. And so I started talking about goodness, and I started asking this question, well, given the fact that business is terrible and our lives are kind of hurting, do you still believe goodness pays? And what I noticed was the reactions that people gave were deep and sincere and inspiring. And I watched whatever kind of hurt that they had would kind of vanish, and somehow the people I'd engaged in those conversations with would walk away with a bounce in their step and sort of a can-do, what's possible type attitude. And I recognized that my grandmother was probably on to something. I was grateful to have the social courage to start using a word like goodness in business, which most people are afraid of, that it's too nice or too squishy or too religious to talk about. What I discovered is that in almost every situation, having a conversation about goodness brought out the best in people. And so what I realized is that I thought I could, at the very least, I could give speeches about this concept. I could figure out a way to feed my family during the Great Recession. In the best case scenario, I thought there was an opportunity to do some groundbreaking research, to take a topic that most people believe in, insert it into the business world, and that we might have a really compelling model to coach and live by. And here we are 10 and a half years later. I never wished that I would have to walk through or wade through an economy like we have now. And now the fact that we've got such social unrest around racial inequities, it is probably the most perfect time during a COVID pandemic. And the fact that literally my city, Minneapolis, has been burning. It's never been a better time to talk about goodness. And so that's what we do. And it's thrilling. And the fact that you and I are on the line today is probably just a signal that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's what a really amazing story, Paul, to receive that phone call from your grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and to light that passion and that purpose within you to be able to then carry that torch and share that with others. And you've done that obviously in numerous ways through speaking and through writing and all the other ways that you touch others. So please, if you will, define goodness as you've defined it.
Yeah. So the benefit of having beautiful relationships is I had two people in my life, Richard Davis, who was the CEO at US Bank at the time, and Greg Page, who was the CEO of Cargill at the time. Both people who were very powerful in the lives of others and lived here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul community. And they were both interested in this idea. And so we cobbled together some research dollars, and we did a very extensive study that looks similar to what Jim Collins did. And probably the most important thing that we landed on was the ubiquitous definition for goodness. So goodness is when people thrive together in a culture of encouragement, accountability, and positive teamwork. So thrive together, which means we can win together. I'm not going to win at your expense. That encouragement is really what makes that work. And that's what my grandmother did with that telephone call. Accountability is helping people do what they say they're going to do in their own best interest. And then positive teamwork, obviously, is exactly the opposite of being told what to do or having, a style where you're being forced into things you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. So that concept really gave us a platform by which to start assessing and teaching around the core idea, which was thrive together.
I love that. And we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail here shortly, but I did want to mention the book. Hopefully this is on the screen right now, but
yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this book, I believe, came out last year, and you wrote this with Paul Hillen, How Goodness Pays. And it's a groundbreaking book. It is a very important book for all leaders to read. And it's also important to understand that being a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a title, right? We can all lead in our lives. We lead in how we show up. But that particular book, what I love about it is research-based. You spent years researching this. And so it's based on facts. It's not based on fluffy information. And I love the way that it's organized, but it's one of those books that not only should we all read, but more importantly, apply the principles in our lives, apply the principles in our businesses. So I wanted to thank you for writing the book, because it's certainly been very meaningful to me, and I know it's going to be meaningful to our audience as well. And Paul, you cover something in this book that you've covered in the past too, and it's something that you cover in your courses, and that is the 7 F's. Would you share the 7 F's with our audience? And what I'd be interested in from you is not only what the 7 F's are, but why are they so important? And then how do they help us live with less fear and radiate goodness?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll give you a small bit of context to lead into that as well. What we learn in the book is that goodness is the principles underneath goodness are very, very common sense, but not always followed. So the idea here, there were 5 things that led to this. One, that organizations that had a compelling plan that the employees felt was compelling, that was the place that we had to start. Most organizations don't have a compelling plan. The second thing is that profitability has to be healthy for everybody, not just the owners and the executives. Third thing is people want to be on a team-based culture. That's how they give their best. Fourth is that in the context of that team-based culture, the decisions are made in ways that are timely and transparent, which is powerful. And then the fifth thing is what we call magnetic ethics, that they set the standard in ways where they had very, very high standards, and the leaders role modeled those standards. So the reason why I give you those things, there are 5 really important things, very common sense. There's nothing there that says that's whiz bang or rocket science. That's the first thing. When we got down to magnetic ethics, we learned that there are certain ways that people live their lives. And the 7 F's is a concept that I had discovered years and years and years before, that other people made connections to goodness before I did. And the 7 F's in alphabetical order are faith, family, finances, fitness, friends, fun, and future. Each one of those are foundational concepts that create a framework to help people live a good life. We think it's easier to radiate goodness if your life is in a good place. And so the 7 F's comes alive most often through this tool that we call the 7 F's Insight tool. It's a wheel. It's a round wheel. It's got 7 spokes on it. And each one of those has a 1 to 10 measure on the spoke. And so we can ask people, what's your satisfaction on each of these? We start with faith because it's alphabetical. It's first. Faith is at the beginning. Fitness is in the middle. Future's at the end. And when we ask people to be intellectually honest about their satisfaction on the 7 F's, it gives them a picture of what their life looks like right now. And then the sort of the smart aleck coaching question that we ask is, will your 7 F's wheel roll? And most people will say, ooh, geez, there's a flat tire, or I have a chunk here in the middle. And well, our basic premise is that it's not easy to radiate goodness. There are so many things that tempt us to lead in ways that maybe don't resonate with goodness. But if your life is in a good place, if you're spiritually fit, if you're physically fit, if you're clean about your finances and your relationships, if you're leading with a clean heart and a well-rounded life, then that's how good leaders create great results with goodness. And I think that basic message of 7 F's and goodness and how they work together is really what our world is yearning for right now, in a way to push back the dark noise that seems to be dominating every media form that we have. So in that context, we think the 7 F's is brilliant, and I could talk about it all day long.
Yeah, it's amazing the way that you've been able to articulate that, and the visual side of it. And I've seen you in action where you work through this with an audience, and that visual of the wheel. It's number one, it's impressive, but I love it because it really does give us some context to think through. And when you're coaching and working with teams, and you're going through that process. So if we find, let's say at the end of the assessment, that we don't have a wheel that's actually going to roll, the areas that we need to work on, are those the first areas that you begin to coach with clients on and help them improve in those areas?
Yeah, so one of the bridges that we have to make for people is that we believe at Good Leadership that you can grow as much on the 7 F's at work as you can at home. That it's a wasted energy to try to separate the two like this. It just doesn't make any sense. The technology and the way we live our lives together, it's all bound together like a spaghetti bowl of things. And so to be able to embrace the idea, we call it blending. The key concept is blending. Figure out a way to blend your work life and your home life together in ways that are healthy, that advance as many of the 7 F's at any given time. So I'll give you an example. We're living in this era of happiness research. And what we're learning is the people who are the happiest join things. They join groups and clubs and things. And so it makes a lot of sense on the 7 F's. If you're happy and you're part of something you really believe in, most of your 7 F's, like they'll choose like a running club. You're got good friends, you're having fun, you're working on your fitness, and with any activity where you blend as many of the 7 F's together, that it's sticky. The marketers would call it sticky. And it also brings the most joy in our lives. So we would first say, if you've got, let's say, the most common answers, people are not happy with their fitness and their finances. Sometimes top executives are low on friends. So we would say, how can you blend the other things together in order to help lift those scores that you're disappointed with? So it's a strategic exercise, but it's also an awakening. And we do this one exercise around 7Fs where when I'm teaching it, I will say, okay, let's consider this moment right now, at this exact moment in history. How many of the 7Fs are you blending at the moment? And they'll usually say, well, I'm working on my future because I'm trying to get better at leadership. And actually now I'm working on my friendships. And I'll say, is anybody having any fun? They say, yeah, I'm having fun. I say, okay, that's at least 3. And then they'll say, yeah, but if I'm a better leader, I'm probably working on my finances at the same time. And eventually you get around and say, well, unless you're standing up and doing steps or something, you're probably working on all 6 except for your fitness. And then they go, aha, I get it. It's learning to be self-aware about where you're grateful and where your life is full on the 7 things, instead of thinking about them individually going, geez, I'm really not happy with how much money I have in my checkbook. So that's the concept underneath it. We think it can be life-changing, and we think it's consistent with this idea that we have called goodness and how goodness pays.
So with that said, and the being able to do a self-assessment and being self-aware, for our viewers, is there a tool available that you provide where they can assess where they fall on the spectrum for each of those 7 Fs?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So out of goodleadership.com, there's a set of free tools there. We decided years and years ago to make the 7Fs wheel open in the public domain because we just didn't feel like it made any sense to try to sell it or protect it. It's a beautiful tool. It's been used hundreds of thousands of times, maybe a million. We use it in all of our events, and it's particularly useful right now in our society. Whenever we get an executive team together, we do what we call a structured check-in, which means you're not just asking people how you're doing, but you're giving them a framework to think about it and express themselves. And we've actually have people ask us, can we start with 7F's wheel? Because it has such a life-giving, life-changing type of process to the thinking and the sharing. And so absolutely, goodleadership.com, there's a tool section, and the 7F's wheel is free for downloading right there.
Outstanding. Very good. Well, thank you for sharing that, and we'll share that again at the end of this episode. So we've alluded to this several times now with what's going on in the world and what a challenging time that we're all facing. It's also an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to show real leadership and be able to radiate goodness. And there is no better time than now to do that. So with that said, how are you processing what's happening in the world today? How has this impacted your business? And when you share that, also share where you see the opportunities.
Well, it's a deep and complex question. I'll try to simplify it into 3 things to think about. First, we think that things like the COVID pandemic and the racial unrest that's happening, that the most natural response is to shrink and protect yourself. So what we're doing with our firm and advising all of our clients to do is to go the opposite way and be generous. If you don't have the courage to go walk on the street and protest, or if you don't have the courage to put on a mask and go help people directly, there's so many ways to be generous. And that generosity opens up your heart. It gives you a sense of gratitude, and it also helps you play offense. And most people that we work with are much happier and feel like they're succeeding when they're playing offense instead of retreating into a defensive shell. So that's really the first thing, is to be generous, lead with an offensive mindset. I think the second thing is that it's powerful these days, just like you said in the opening, to really think about and reflect on how are the events of our lives changing us as people. You know, you and I are both middle-aged white men. And there's an acceptance here that we have been the people through the last 200-300 years of the United States of America that have had all the decision-making power. And I'm wondering, how are the decisions that I make, how's the images I project on my website, how's the language I choose in what I do for a living, how does that perpetuate that? Because boy, what we've seen lately is that, especially with social media, the anger is only going to go faster unless we figure out a way to start to dissolve it faster. And you know what? Us middle-aged white males, we're accountable as much or more than anybody else. So I think accepting that, learning what we can do, changing our friend sets, figuring out how you can live a more inclusive, appreciative lifestyle. I think society needs us to do that. And then I think the third thing is to really assess the core value, not values, but value that our businesses provide in society. What we're learning is that grocery stores in South Minneapolis provide way more than just food. There's an amazing collection place, and that's where people gather for safety and find community. And now that those grocery stores are gone, the community's really hurting. And there are things that we can do in each one of our businesses to add value, not only to our shareholders, but to the communities that we serve. We believe very strongly that goodness comes from businesses that work in communities that are thriving. And so if your business doesn't have a strategy to make the community better, I don't understand where you think you're going to get your employees and the people that work in the hardware store and the grocery store. We need each other. And so I think responding with a generous mindset that allows you to play offense, being self-reflective in ways that are intellectually honest. How is your dialogue and your thought process in your business making things worse, not better? And then understanding that our businesses do more than just produce wealth for our shareholders, that we've got to do things that improve our community every day. If everybody did that, that's the way we can work our way out of this.
Wow. Yeah, very, very true. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'd like to chat for a moment about your Good Leadership Breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had to adapt, obviously, through COVID-19. You're doing some things differently right now than you had been
Yes,
before.
we are.
But what was the genesis behind the Good Leadership Breakfast? And that has been going on now for 10 years. You're in your 11th year,
yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, we are. Yeah, thanks. You did your homework. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'll tell you, it started with my grandmother. When the economy really started to crash, I made a decision that I needed to do my own thing. And when I left the business, all I wanted to do was go away and hide for a while and to just rest and recuperate and dream about what I was going to do. And so after I quit, I didn't really realize how many people were going to track me down and ask, hey, what happened and how can I help? So eventually I checked into my email and there were hundreds of people asking what they could do to help. And so one of my colleagues, who was a colleague who was on our advisory board for the new firm, said, you know what, get them all together. You're going to write a book anyway. Just do it like a big buy your own breakfast meeting. It can be like a focus group. So I sent a note saying, okay, the first Friday in January at this country club in Minnesota, we're going to do a breakfast event, but you have to pay for your own breakfast. And I like a dumb guy. I didn't think about it much, and I didn't think about RSVPs or anything. And 73 people showed up.
Wow.
And I was like, what do I do now? And so a couple of my buddies, we huddled together and we came up with some discussion topics and we treated it like a very large focus group. And then I just did some updates about what I was thinking. I talked about 7S and I asked the people to discuss in the room at their tables, where do you see the goodness in all of this? And remember, that was at the lowest of the low, the Great Recession, until of course what we're going through now. And the buzz of positivity that came in the room was just undeniable. And when it was over, one woman rolled her hand and said like this, she said, hey, when are we going to do this again? This is awesome. And I said, I don't want to do it again. This is my way out of getting out of doing coffee with all you guys. And one of my friends said, no, you have to do it. It will help you. And one of my friends said, we're going to call it the Good Leadership Breakfast. And one thing led to another. And then a year later, one of my really good friends, Paul Hillen, who I wrote the book with, he said, we have to figure out how to sell sponsorships because this thing's going to roll. And that's exactly what happened. We've hosted now over 17,000 guests. We've raised over $350,000 for charity. We're now hosting international speakers, Charles Antis, who flew in from California. And we've had to take a U-turn. We can't gather people.
Right.
We're not sophisticated enough to do real broadcasting, but I can tell you we've got some entities in Minneapolis, St. Paul who really want to see us come back strong. And what we're planning right now is an internet television broadcast specifically aimed at young leaders. And we're going to help them create a foundation because society is now asking them to pave a better path forward.
Mm-hmm.
So the next breakfast will be broadcast over the internet. I will make sure I share that with you. It's on Friday, August 21. We're partnering with the Big Ten and with the University of Minnesota and a couple of corporations here in Minneapolis so that we can produce a bona fide 55-minute research-based interactive program. And maybe that'll be the path forward for us.
Wow. Love that. It's amazing how when situations like this present themselves to us, how
Mm-hmm.
we respond makes all the difference in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
opportunities like this to be able to serve a larger audience
Mm-hmm.
is fantastic. And your message is so meaningful, and it's so important for all of us to hear. So thank you for continuing to figure out ways to adapt and to serve. It's quite
Mm-hmm.
spectacular. So, Paul, before I ask my last question, and you shared one of the resources with us, but I'd like you to repeat that. Where can we go to learn more about you, buy your books, and check out your amazing content?
Good. Well, thank you. The website is goodleadership.com. It's been interesting. We've sold more books in the last 90 days or 100 days than we have in any other period. The message is powerful. The content is good. The discussion is relevant. And if you dig around there a little bit, there's some test drives for some of the tools that we use for our clients. But in general, we live with a generous, open heart, and we want people to use our information however they wish. And when it comes time to rally an executive team to make sure they're aligned and committed to a whole new level of accountability for growth, that's how we make our living. We've got about 35 clients around the country and a couple international as well that we really help them take the path of transformation to get their organizations to the next level. And, our business didn't slow down for a while. But the phone is ringing now. We took on 2 new clients last week. We have 2 new coming on this week. There are people that are optimistic, and I think they've done what we recommended. They've been introspective. They try to figure out where their value really is. And once they figure that out, there's no reason to wait. We may as well align people, get the commitment to the new strategy, and go for it. And that's what we do. And we do it with this idea that we say that goodness pays. And if you are willing to listen, there's a ton of good research and some simple things to do to make sure your organization has the very best chance of succeeding. I'm really grateful for the chance to have been able to share our story with you.
Well, thank you for sharing it. I appreciate it. So here is my final question for you for today.
Mm-hmm.
For your Good Leadership Breakfast, if you could interview any living person, who would it be and why?
Boy, that's an interesting one to take off the top of my head right now. I have become a really big Bill Gates fan. I think what Bill and Melinda Gates have done to take their life of amazing wealth and channel it towards humanitarian efforts at dollar amounts that no one has ever conceived. What Bill Gates has gotten his billionaire, trillionaire colleagues to donate is unprecedented. The more I listen to him, the more I hear him think, the more I know for a fact he believes goodness pays. I'd love to ask him how he's kind of overcome the fact that he's like a tycoon. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that I feel like that would be really powerful. He's one. There's several others, but I would say second, I'm really, really fascinated with the Bishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. They wrote a fantastic book together about joy and struggle.
Yes.
And those kinds of things have really shaped me. So great question. Appreciate the opportunity to answer that.
Great. Well, I tell you what I can't look forward to is watching those 2 episodes or being there in person to see those guests on your show. You do a phenomenal job. And I wanted to mention one other thing as well. Are you a music fan? A jazz fan?
Oh, heck yeah. Heck yes.
The band, the trio that you have, I'm not sure if it's a trio, but the group that you have at the Good Leadership Breakfast, love the music.
Yeah. I met Benny Weinbeck when he and I were both 26 years old. We're 57 now. So like, do the math. And when we decided to do live music at our breakfast, there was only one choice. He's the best jazz piano player within 200 miles of here, and grateful. He will be so happy when I tell him you mentioned it.
I tell you, it is a beautiful thing, and I'm so grateful for you for sharing them to the rest of the world. For those of us that aren't able to be there in person, so it's wonderful. So, Paul, thank you so very much for being here today. I'm grateful for you, as I mentioned, grateful for the work that you've put out, and really for all of you. Do go check out Paul's content, go to the website, learn more about not only this book, but the amazing work that Paul is doing. Absorb it, live it, and apply it in your life. As we said earlier, there is no more important time than today to take action on this and to live these principles. So, Paul, thank you again for being here. I greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And for the rest of you, thank you so very much for watching. If you found value in this episode, you know what to do. Like and share with your friends. And until next time, stay healthy and optimistic. Keep learning and growing. Find peace. And remember that transformative change in your life and business always begins with you, and nothing happens until you take action. And we will see you on the next episode of Business Minds Coffee Chat.